Hello Neighbor has always been a game I've known for a long time, mostly from YouTubers I used to watch, but I never really had a computer that can play that game back in the day, so I couldn't really play it. It was only until the final release of the game, when it was released on the Nintendo Switch, that I could play it, because it was the only thing I had that could play the game. So I got the game for Christmas, but I was too scared to play the game at first, even though I've watched countless YouTube videos on the game and knew exactly how to beat the game. But around a year later, I decided to play the game again and actually beat it. And surprisingly, I had a lot of fun playing the game. Although the game is considered horrendous by most, I actually enjoy playing the game. Even though the game barely works, the puzzles of the game are just insanely complicated for no reason. Like, no one who hasn't seen the full guide of the game would know that you have to get the globe, freeze it in the freezer, put the frozen globe on the globe stand, for the water to be frozen in order to get the red gramophone in order to shrink the plants on the roof so you can bring the gun in the no gun room in order to get the red key. But you can just cheese the game by throwing a shoe at the lever to get the red key with the super throw. Like, this game is just so broken on so many levels. But that's what makes the game fun in my opinion. I don't really play the game for like a really well made puzzle game. I play it because I know how to beat the puzzles and find it fun to beat them. The puzzles are really ridiculous, but if you know how to complete the puzzles, it can actually be fun. Before we get into the review of the main game, I want to go over several different alphas of the game before the final release. For those who don't know, there were several alphas of the game before the actual game was released. If I remember correctly, there were 5 alphas. Pre-alpha, which was basically just a test of the game. It was released to the public, but it was very broken, mainly because the game was basically just a test of the neighbor AI. But the game exploded in popularity with this release. Even though it was just a pre-alpha, YouTubers saw this game and saw a lot of content from it. And there was a lot of content from this game just off the pre-alpha. There was gameplay, theories, and animations of the game just off the pre-alpha. So basically this game took over the internet just with the pre-alpha. So when the first alpha of the game was released, it was even more popular than the pre-alpha. And this version of the game was actually pretty good. It actually worked pretty well. The neighbors still bugged out often, but the physics and puzzles of this game were actually pretty creative, and people really liked the game. And the amount of content made from this game was insane. I always enjoyed watching some Hello Neighbor Alpha 1 by every old school gaming YouTuber you can think of. The peak of this game, according to several YouTubers though, was Hello Neighbor 2, Alpha 2. In my opinion, I think this is where the game peaked, with there being the most YouTube content about this game, and it was the best puzzle game that they had. Every single puzzle was clear and relatively easy to complete. And the neighbor was actually getting a lot smarter, and I think this was the best version of the neighbor, smartness wise, of all the alphas and the full release. It had the best art style as well. Every single version of the game had a really different type of art style. At first, from the pre-alpha, the developers tried for a more realistic game style, but the more alphas were released, the game became more and more cartoony, which I'm not really a fan of. Seems like the cartoon art style is just made for all the younger audience, so it looks more appealing to them. But the art style has never really been something that's affected the game too much for me. But I do prefer that old art style of the first alpha and the pre-alpha of being more realistic. But from this point on, this is where the game saw its fan base go from loved by most to disliked by pretty much everybody. Because Alpha 3 was just, it was really bad, to be honest. Like, the house went from something relatively easy to navigate to just way too much. Another part of the game that no one liked is that for some reason the game was always at night, because usually the game would have a day and night cycle, or just always stay daytime. But this time, this game, it was only at night, and it was horrible because the lighting of the game is horrible. So unless you have a flashlight, this game looks like a nightmare to play. The puzzles became more complicated than it needed to be, and the neighbor was basically irrelevant because most parts of the house you need to go to, the neighbor can't even reach. And just overall, people were not fans of this game at all. Like, in the third alpha, you had to do this one little platforming thing at the very start of the game, and if you do it, then you just basically don't have to worry about the neighbor at all. It was crazy. And then Alpha 4 came out, and this game fixed only one problem from the previous alpha. The game had a day and night cycle. But other than that, the alpha this alpha was probably the worst one, with the house being bigger than ever, making the neighbor even more irrelevant, and the game just felt unfinished. Even though this is just an alpha, it just seemed like it wasn't finished at all, with unfinished textures and parts of the game that couldn't really be completed. But this was the last alpha until the final game came out, and you would think that these alphas were a good indicator about which parts should be included or excluded for the game. But it really seemed like the developers didn't really listen to any of the criticism from the previous alphas, because the game really turned out to be a mess. But let's go over each act of the game, because there are 4 acts of the game and all of them are pretty unique. The first act of the game starts with you being a young kid kicking his bouncy ball down the street, and all of a sudden the kid hears a loud scream from one of the houses, and the neighbor struggles to get a hold of someone else. So the kid goes and investigates the situation, and when he gets to the window to see what's going on, he sees the neighbor running out of the basement and looking guilty of something, and all of a sudden he sees you, and then he breaks through the window to catch you, which raises the question, what kind of window does this guy use? Because you can just throw anything at them and they'll shatter. Like, you can throw a pillow and the window will absolutely shatter into a ton of pieces. And he loved breaking through windows, even breaking through them while not chasing you. So while he is just walking around, sometimes he'll just throw himself out a window just because, why not, But whatever. It's kind of funny that the windows can just be broken really easily, and it's kind of needed for the game to work. But once the neighbor catches you, it shows a cutscene of him putting a key into the room that you have to get into. So it's a pretty good start to the game, because you have a clear objective of what you need to do, and you are motivated to see what's in the basement, because you are suspecting that he's trapping someone in the basement. But the screaming in the basement is basically non-stop, because the game plays a screaming noise from the basement every 3 seconds. It gets annoying pretty quick. But once you get free control of your character, you really have no tutorial on what to do, because there's no tutorial on really what to do in the game. The only things that the game tells you is when you press pause, it shows you 3 actions you can do. Pick up an item, throw an item, and I forget the other one, but it doesn't really show you much. But once you can play the game, the only thing you know is that you have to get the red key and get into the basement. That's really it. So the only thing you can do is explore and see what you can do in order to get closer to the basement. Once you start exploring, you will inevitably see the neighbor, and he'll start to chase you, and you'll realize just how unpolished and overall bad the neighbor is. The neighbor was once the main selling point of the game, advertising an AI that learns from your every move. But this is just not true in the game. The neighbor learns a little, but the only thing he does is set some bear traps and puts a bucket on some doors and places a lot of cameras, a lot of cameras if you get caught. But getting back to the actual puzzles of the game, the puzzles of this game aren't too complicated. If you explore enough, you'll find how to get the red key. So once you get into the basement, this is where things get pretty bad in the first act. This part and the second act are my least favorite parts of the game. So let's talk about the basement. It starts with you going down some stairs and getting into a pretty normal looking room. But once you look around, you realize that the washing machine is a door for some reason, which raises the question, if the one washing machine he has is fake, then how does he wash his clothes? I mean, he does wear the same outfit since the pre-alpha, so does that mean he doesn't wash his clothes? Pretty nasty, I'm not gonna lie, but whatever. I can't smell him since, he's in the video game, so it doesn't affect me. But once you go through the door, you will see a prison cell, basically, with fake windows and fake outside lights. So he definitely has a prisoner in here. But it seems like he escaped because there's no window at one of the windowsills. So once you jump through the window as well to explore, you figure out that this is a huge basement. It's a full-on maze. But in order to get to the basement, you can't go back through where you came from because, I don't know. But anyway, you start to explore, and you see that the exit on the other side of the maze. But you need to turn off the power so you can turn on the generator to open the exit door. But the power switch is all the way at the start of the basement, so you need to go all the way back and turn off the power. But in the maze, there are electrical gates that you need to open using a lever. But once you turn off the power, those doors close. So you need to get to the generator a different way. But once you get back to the power, the neighbor is there for some reason. So that just makes your life just more annoying. And he'll turn on the power while you're trying to get back to the generator, which just makes your life even more annoying. But once you finally get to the exit door, the neighbor comes and tries to catch you when you open the door. But once you enter the exit door, there's like a long corridor with twists and turns. So you have to run away from the neighbor through the corridor. But once you finally reach the real exit, there are some locks in the door, so you can't open it, so you just get caught. And during this chase scene, the absolute worst music is playing. Like, it hurts your ears to listen to. But after that, that's really the end of Act 1. Overall, this is the best act of the game, because, to be honest, it's just the most simple. And the neighbor is actually relevant, but not too annoying. The puzzles are also pretty simple. Like, if it's your first time playing the game and you've never watched any YouTube videos on the game, you can still figure out the act, but it'll still take some time. But that's the last time you can do that in this game, because if you don't know what you're doing, these next 3 acts are not going to be fun for you. But anyways, let's get into the worst act in the game in my opinion, Act 2. Act 2 starts with you waking up in one of the prison things that the neighbor made for you. Looks like one of the ones in the basement from the first act. So you're kind of just stuck in the room for about 10 seconds until there's a loud noise outside the room. And then all of a sudden, the door is unlocked. And if you look through the door keyhole while it happens, you can see a cardboard cutout of a little boy. It doesn't really make sense to me, but it probably has something to do with the lore of the game. This game has like an unnecessary amount of lore to it for no reason. And sometimes when the neighbor catches you, instead of just sending you back to where you spawn normally, it sends you to a different place that explains the lore kind of the game. I don't really know too much of the lore. All I know is that the neighbor wife died in a car crash, the brother killed the sister, and the neighbor locked up the boy in the basement. But I think there's other stuff in the game, like how the neighbor's associated with the devil or something like that. I don't really know. It's kind of irrelevant. But once you escape the basement, you get to go outside, and you see that the neighbor put up a huge fence around the house, so no one can escape. And he added more layers to the house, so now it's like 4 floors instead of 2 floors, which makes sense game design wise. You mix up the house, so it's not the same as the first act, and it would get pretty stale if it was. But the part about this act that I hate is the fence around the house. This means that once the neighbor sees you, which he inevitably will, you cannot go back to your house to make him not chase you. So once he sees you, it's really annoying to get him to stop chasing you. It gets annoying because most of the places you need to go, the neighbor will camp there and make your life more difficult, which means that the AI is learning, but it just makes your life more annoying. But one thing about this game that makes no sense to me is how the kids' parents don't do anything to save you. Like, I'm pretty sure there are missing children signs, but wouldn't the neighbor have the screaming kids from this house, like, while the kids are being missing, is a pretty clear sign that he's the one behind the kidnappings. And if that's not weird enough, wouldn't the huge fence he builds around his house as soon as a kid went missing be pretty suspicious? These people in the game gotta be the dumbest people ever, but whatever. It's best if we don't question that stuff, to be honest. But going back to the act itself, there are 3 ways you can escape. You can use a trampoline to jump over the fence, you can exit through the front entrance once you collect a key, or you can break through some of the fences to escape to the side using a crowbar. There is also one more way to escape. That's, you can glitch the game. You can stand on a certain point of the house, and the neighbor will throw glue at your feet, and you'll go flying in the air. So you can just fly over the fence. So if you don't want to deal with this act, then you can just do that. I like how there's different ways you complete this act. It makes it more replayable and adds more variety. The biggest aspect of the game is the water system. In this act, being able to manipulate the water is essential for getting any of the endings. You need to find levers on the water pipes in order to create a strong enough water pressure to burst the valve off the pipe. This valve unlocks a lot of the rest of the house, because like I said before, using the water is essential for beating this game. But the puzzles in this game are actually pretty weird. Like, how do you know that you have to get a toy construction worker, put him on the toilet in a dollhouse in order for you to a toy construction worker to appear on the real house so you can grab the crowbar he's holding. Although the puzzles aren't as crazy as Acts 3 puzzles will be, they can still be pretty annoying if you haven't watched the guide on this act. And once you escape the house, there's a really weird camera angle showing the kid running from the house, and once the camera cuts to a more normal angle, you can see the neighbor just staring at you, and you run back to the house right across from the neighbor's house. But it raises another question, like, how did the parents not know that the neighbor stole your kid? There's gotta be something wrong with them. Unless the kid is not actually like a kid and he owns the house for himself and his parents just live somewhere completely different. That could make sense, to be honest, but whatever. It's just best if we don't really question it and we just play the game and not really think much into it. And so that's Act 2. Overall, it doesn't really seem too bad from what I just talked about in this video, but once you play it from yourself, you'll know why I don't really like this act. It's just too annoying to have to deal with the neighbor, especially since you can't run back to your house while he's chasing you. But anyways, now on to by far the biggest act of the game, Act 3. Act 3 will probably be the longest part of this video, so let's get right into it. So now we're an official adult, unless we were adult in the acts in 1 and 2, and now he's just like a super adult. And at first you're just chilling in your apartment, looking around and everything until you hear a knock on your door, and a mailman drops a letter on your floor. And once you read it, you realize that you're evicted from your house, which is kind of embarrassing. You're evicted from a 3-room apartment. It had a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. He could be living in California though, which makes sense why he couldn't afford it. But seeing that we aren't really in English, because the words are in a different language, it'd be pretty weird if you were in California. But anyways, you pack your bags with some books, an apple, the essentials, and head to your new house, which turns out to be your old house from when you were a kid. But it's in terrible condition, and you can see the neighbor's house burned down on the other side. But these 2 houses are the only ones in bad condition. Every other house looks perfectly fine though, except for those 2 houses. But as you start to move in, you hear a phone ring in your new house, which doesn't really make any sense at all. But once you enter your house to answer that phone call, you will see a shadow figure at the neighbor's house, and you get really confused, and you just decide to go to sleep. But when you wake up in the middle of the night to a hammer beating on the window, you wake up to your house perfectly back to normal, and you look up to see what the noise is, and you can see the neighbor's house is back, but this time there's about 15 extra rooms layered on the house. This house is just comically big. It even has a train running through it, which is it's just absurd. This entire house is just too big, to be honest. I know the neighbor only uses 3 floors in the house at most, and the train is not even working. It's out of order until you have to turn it on. But anyways, once you get free to move around, it's really difficult to know what to do first, since there's just so much stuff to do and the house is so big. I mean, if you'd never watched a Hello Neighbor video before, then this will have you in a lot of trouble figuring out what to do. But if you're watching this video, then you probably know about the Hello Neighbor and you've watched some videos on the game and know how to complete it. So I'm not really going to go into that much depth on the puzzles, because if I did, the video would be a lot longer than it needs to be. But the essentials are, you have 3 abilities that you need to get. One of them being able to, when you crouch, you turn invisible. Another one being the ability to double jump. And the last one being able to escape from the neighbor when he catches you. In order to get these power-ups, you need to play some mini games, which are supposed to be like the player getting over his fears of the neighbor or something like that, because he caused a lot of trauma in the player's life. But the game just makes no sense on how they get over his fear of the neighbor. I think one of his fears is being in a crowded area because he's afraid of someone kidnapping him. But one of the games is when you're in a supermarket and the people in there try to sneak up on you to catch you. So it makes sense that the game tries to explain this fear. It kind of makes sense. But the other 2 games just make no sense. I think the school one is the same thing as the supermarket, except just insanely hard. This school minigame is the hardest part of the game, in my opinion. But it really isn't even a good game design. When all the kids are in class, the security guards make your life so much more difficult. And the people are just so fast in the minigames. Like, there's no chance you can escape from them once they find you and they start chasing you. But the last game is the most confusing of them all, because you're just in a pantry and you have to platform your way all the way through all the foods in the pantry. I'm not really sure if this like makes the player get over any fear of something, but at least it's not that hard to complete. It just requires a little bit of skill and patience, because the platforming in this game is very different from other games. The physics of this game just make platforming pretty difficult, which sucks because platforming is one of the biggest things in Act 3. Like, there's a good amount of platforming in this act, which if you aren't used to platforming in this game, it'll cause a lot of frustration because the house is so big. So if you fall all the way down to the bottom of the house because you messed up on one jump, it'll cause a lot of frustration, especially when you need to be at a certain time, and once you have the time you want, you die from falling over to the neighbor. Then you have to die a lot more times in order to get to that same time of the day and night cycle. But getting caught that many times will cause the neighbor to put a lot of traps around the house, making it pretty difficult to navigate the bottom floor of the house. Another weird thing about this act is the game advertises the neighbor so much, but like he isn't a main part of the game at all. But in the third act, the neighbor is irrelevant because besides the bottom floor of the house, the neighbor will not find you. He doesn't go anywhere past like the third floor, maybe at most. Sometimes he goes up the elevator, but that's pretty rare. So for a home that uses the neighbor as the main part of the game, he's not really a threat at all in the third act. In fact, in his area is terrible. Like, the crazy Pathfinder he uses that the developers hyped up so much is nowhere to be found. But we've known for a long time that the neighbor's AI is terrible and a complete joke. But the third act takes a long time to get to the basement, taking about like 3.5 hours to complete if you know what you're doing. So if you had no clue what you're doing, this will take probably a few days to complete. But once you finally get into the basement, it's similar to the first act, but a little different at the same time. But you cannot get through this basement if you don't have the 3 power-ups I mentioned before, because you have to use them in order to get past some of the things in the basement. But unlike the basement in the first act, there's really no puzzle you have to solve, if I remember correctly. So it's just some platforming and exploring, which is good because the puzzles in the first act basement was not fun. But once you get to the same door that you found in the first act, you gotta try and escape the basement, and you find the neighbor again. But since you have the power up to escape him, you knock him away and lock the door, and you can't. And you start to run away. You go through that same corridor, and you're finally able to unlock that door. And once you open up that door, you're immediately thrown into Act 4. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Act 4 now. We've been here for so long, so let's talk about it. Act 4 starts you in a bright room, and you just kind of sit there for a little bit. Then you see an absolutely ginormous neighbor. Why is it huge? I don't know, but he's huge now because, why not? And he has a house on his back because also, why not, And you're supposed to get to that house, but the game doesn't really tell you that. So I can definitely see some people getting confused on where to go. But you have to do a lot of things in order to get high enough to be able to float down to the house. But in order to get to the house, you have to get the neighbor low enough to the ground to where you can launch off of a toaster to be able to get on his house in the back. So, but when you try and do that, the house is just insanely hard to get into, especially since the neighbor moves so much. So whenever you think you're gonna get to the house, he just moves a little bit, and now you have to launch yourself again, which gets annoying very quickly. But once you finally get into the house, you get put into a room with a bunch of missing children flyers, but for some reason it says simming instead of missing. But you walk around for a little bit, exploring as per usual, until you see the neighbor putting up these flyers in the distance. You see a shadow figure shine a light on him, which doesn't really make sense at all. But once you enter the exit door in that room, you're met with the final part of the game. You're put in a room with your younger self, and he's playing with some toys. And all of a sudden, he looks really scared, and he runs to the upstairs room. And that same shadow man we saw in the previous rooms appears outside and tries to break through the house and kill the kid. I think he's trying to kill him, but I don't know. But you have to stand in front of the kid to stop the shadow man from hurting your younger self. And once you stop him for the first time, The little kid runs to a new spot, and the shadow figure tries to do the same thing he did before. But for some reason, every time you stop the shadow man from hurting your younger self, you become bigger, so it makes it more difficult to move around. It doesn't really make sense at all. I think it's supposed to be like some symbolism, but I don't really understand it, to be honest. But you do this a few more times, and all of a sudden, the Shadow Man disappears. You defeat the Shadow Man. I think the Shadow Man is supposed to represent fear, and since you destroyed the Shadow Man, you lose the fear of the neighbor that caused so much trauma in your life. So the last room you're in is just all white with the exit door behind you. But if you turn around, you see a house with the neighbor and the Shadow Man. There's two separate rooms, one with the neighbor and one with the Shadow Man in this house, from what you can see. And one room has a Shadow Man, and I already said that, but okay. The neighbor looks really sad and defeated them, while the Shadow Man looks like he's haunting the neighbor. I don't really know how to describe the scene. I guess it's supposed to be a symbolic thing of something. I don't know. But once you enter the exit door, you wake up. That's right. This whole entire third act was just a dream. But all of a sudden, the world seems brighter, and you seem to be happier. You have officially conquered your fear and trauma with the neighbor. And as the credits roll, you start to unpack your things from your car in your new house, and you have completed the game. So why do I like this game? From describing it, it seems like this game is terrible and not fun at all. And it is a terrible game. Everything about this game is just fundamentally flawed, and it sometimes sucks to play. But for some reason, I enjoy playing this game every time I play it. I think if you don't really take the game seriously, and you come with a very, very low expectation that this game will be bad, you'll find yourself having some fun. But only if you know how to complete every puzzle, to be honest. Because if you come into this game without knowing anything about it beforehand, this game will be terrible and you'll have no clue what you're doing, and you'll find yourself miserable while playing this game. I think another reason I like this game is because this game was basically a piece of my childhood. Watching all those YouTubers playing the game and seeing how this game took over the internet really made me fond of this game. So when I finally got the game for myself, I found myself having a lot of fun because I watched it so many times. So basically, I like it just because it's nostalgic to me. I don't know. But looking at this game objectively with no bias, it's horrible. You know, with a story that makes no sense and so many glitches in the game. I can certainly see why so many people hate this game. And sometimes while I play the game, I think to myself, like, why do I actually play this game? Some parts are really annoying to complete. This game tried to be a lot more than it is, from at first going from a game heavily focused on sneaking and stealth elements, and focusing on the neighbor and his AI learning, to now just making the game basically a platformer with horrible controls, and a neighbor that does even try and catch you. It's just bad. But for some reason, I think that the game is good because it's bad. Alright, well, that's the whole video now, you know? It's a 5.4 thousand word document I wrote for a script. It's a lot. I wonder how long this video is going to be. It's probably 30 minutes, maybe? I think it's going to be around that time. That's crazy. 5.4 thousand words. But if you do like this video, hit the subscribe button, I think. Like the video, because I put on a lot of work in this video. It's probably the hardest I've worked for a video. It took me like 3 days to write the script. It took me like an hour and a half of filming. An hour and a half, something like that of filming. So if you can just like leave a like on this video, if you even made it this far. I don't know if you're watching this. Probably like 2 people watching this part, but if you like this, subscribe so I know that, people like this kind of content. And if you want to learn how to become more confident in yourself, first link in the description to give you a full confidence course and how I went from someone who's not very confident at all in myself to someone who's very confident in my everyday life. So if you want to learn that, first link in the description. If not, have a good day and play Hello Neighbor, I guess, if you want.